Hello, friends. We're back with another episode of Exit Point, the podcast that features conversations with some of the world's most extreme adventure sports athletes. If you've been enjoying the podcast and would like to help support our efforts, please consider subscribing on your favorite platform and leaving us a review. And if you feel like you've been getting a lot of value from the show, you may be interested in helping us keep the lights on here at Exit Point HQ. You can do this by buying us a coffee. There's a link in the description. A huge thank you to everyone who's reached out with your emails and contributions. Your support and communication is what makes this project thrive. In this episode, Matt and I speak with Jamie Crawford. Jamie is an expert in urban base jumping who has been honing his skills with patience, dedication, and intention for over a decade. I've been so focused on wingsuit base for all these years, I love the fresh perspective he brings with his hardcore urban style. He has generously agreed to shed some light on what has historically been a shadowy, dark art. Jamie is always full of good stories, so this should be a good one. So with that, let's get Jamie on the track. I want to hear a little bit more before we start about you doing a ceremony with your mom, because Ellen just asked me, oh, yeah, I just saw that he posted something about doing a ceremony with his mom. That sounds so intense.
It was so intense. I mean, she's always been kind of a big fan of mine in the sense that when I was younger, I was just an angry teenager rebelling against the world, and I didn't know why yet, but I knew something wasn't right. And then that was my first introduction to psychedelics, so mushrooms, which really kind of changed my whole life from that point on. And my mom noticed that. My mom and I have always been close, so she was like, "Oh, you're not an angry teenager anymore. Like, what changed?" And so I, was honest with her all the time and told her about, I had this experience on mushrooms, whatever, and kind of she's followed that path for me for my life. And so when I got into ayahuasca 7 years ago, went to Peru, obviously she saw the changes within me through that process, and so she finally was like, "Look, I want to try this stuff," and my mom's 70s, like it's pretty like laborious work. You're not, you're super high on really, really powerful psychedelic, and you're laying there for a lot. You're really nauseous. People are puking all around you. It's a kind of a trial by fire for the first experience. So what was interesting was I feel like you do so much work on your genetics when you're on ayahuasca. It's kind of like the best way I can explain it after doing, I think I've done maybe 25, 27 nights of it now so far since those 7 years. Is that it's like a psychic surgery. It's a spiritual surgery. You're actually doing real energetic work within your framework. A lot of it's within your DNA, within your heritage, the things you don't think about. And so to have my mom there, which is part of my lineage, I came out of her vagina, like so have her like
Literally
next to me and like feeling how much actual it perpetuated it magnified the effects by having her with me during ceremony, so I could feel it. Because when you're in ceremony in ayahuasca, you're working you're not working in the three-dimensional reality. You're absolutely working, I think, in multiple dimensions at once. It's time isn't linear anymore when you're on the medicine. You're going back and forward all at once. It's all present in the now. And so you have this ability to really kind of see everything in your life like a hologram. Like instead of like a line of like progression, you see everything in this interconnected web and how they're all framed together. And so I could see like my mom and her work and what she had, and how that passed down to me. And but also like how if I do work, it affects her, and if she does work, it affects me. It doesn't go necessarily in a certain time order when you're working on the medicine. So it was kind of hard too. Obviously I was concerned. I had to make sure she was okay and wasn't like freaking out, or so I was always kind of, while I was on my own progress and working on myself, I was always kind of had a chunk of my attention to her, to make sure she was good. And I had to help her to because you walk up and you have the shaman sings plant medicine songs, Icaros. So I do the Shipibo tradition. So they sing a specific plant vibration to you, which is part of your healing process when you go to do the medicine. And I had to like help her up because she was so high. She never gets high. She doesn't do any of this kind of stuff, so she was outside of her comfort zone in a big way. And I would help her up to get the song, and come back and grab her, and then she always had these funny one-liners when I'd get her back. I took your turn, Jamie. I was like, you good? Do you need anything? She's like, yeah, $1 million. I was just like, you're fucking hilarious. But she got a lot out of it, you know. Usually your first time, you don't really have a lot. You're not really able to perceive everything that's happening to you at the time. A lot of the work happens after the workshops. So it's really good to be checking in with each other on a daily basis for at least a couple of weeks after you do the medicine. So you can, because everything starts to unfold a lot more than you think it's going to. The medicine continues to work, and so she's noticed that in a big way, that she's releasing a lot of trauma from childhood and stuff like that. And it's funny enough, I I have a all my grandparents were almost dead, and my mom's mom was alive still. And it was about 2005. I did a recording. I videotaped her, and I asked her. I did this like hour-long interview about her life. I just watched that last night, actually, and it was so interesting to see. You know, I could see all the similarities between her and my mom. And so my granny lived through World War II. She was getting bombed by the Nazis in London when where she met my grandpa. And hearing the soul stories, and her original flame was the Spitfire pilot, that she had the hots for, and he died. My grandpa was kind of like second place, but it's a 54-year marriage before he died. And it was just really interesting to see, that's not that far away in your bloodline when you think about it, and what kind of experiences they were going through. And how much that really affects you more than you think, because you're a product of them. And it's not just your physical traits that you inherit from your family. It's a lot of it is their emotional and spiritual states as well. Also their addictive behavior patterns, all of that kind of stuff is something you have to deal with. So it really works on that on a very deep level. And so it was a magnificent experience to have my mom there, for sure. I hope she does it again. I think she would. We did 3 nights in a row, and that's pretty intense. Like by the third night, you're like, fuck, I don't know if I can do any more of this processing and stuff. And you're just raw. But she managed. And so I think she'd like to do like a 1 or 2 night experience next time she does it. Cause she's 70 and it's pretty hard on your body. And, even when I'm doing it, 45, I was like, yeah, you're like done at the end of it, a lot of purging, a lot of releasing, all kinds of, it's very intense work. It's
You
definitely
feel like
not
a
there.
wrung
You're not
out
going there to
towel.
have fun. What's that?
You feel like a wrung out towel afterwards.
Exactly. It really is like that. It is, what I've noticed too is it astringes your cells, like, because you don't think about it. You're like 60-70% water, right? So that's like all of your makeup of your being. You carry a lot of water within you. And have you guys seen those experiments with like dark field microscopes and stuff, where they freeze, like, with when you put a certain emotion into water, and then you freeze it, and then you take pictures of it with this dark field microscope, and you can see the geometric patterns and how perfectly geometrically structured they are, with like feelings of love and peace and harmony and stuff. And then anger is like all fractured, these fractured crystals, and they're like jagged. And anyway, so I think really the medicine squeezes all of that water out of you that's negative. And so you release a lot of your water. I usually lose 2 or 3 pounds of water weight when I do the medicine, and it's just squeezing out of you like all this negative imprints that you carry around within the water within your cells. That's like this cellular imprints that you carry within you. It's very interesting. So that's what I think happens.
I just typed in Japanese scientist and it auto-filled water experiment. I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's it. Yep. It's super interesting. So I definitely feel like that's what it does. It detoxes all of this negative water out of your cell makeup. It's out of your body.
I asked that more or less as a warm-up question, but damn, you came with the heat right off the bat. I want to get back to that. Both Matt and I want to talk about that more, because I think it applies a lot to your perspective on base jumping and who you are as a person. But I wanted to start off with a memorable jump, because you have a lot of them. And there's one in particular that I think that you went to really great extent just to make it to the roof. Will you give us a story?
Yeah, that definitely. That's kind of what pinnacles. My experience with urban was the Trump Tower in Chicago, and that was back in 2012. I was with my mentor Kyle Dewey, and he's someone I want to talk about later on, because he was a massive influence on me and why I have such a passion for urban. Anyway, we'd driven from Colorado to Chicago to, we knew there was a big skyline there and lots of nice buildings. And we did our usual thing, which I learned from him in Hawaii, which I'll talk about more later. But he became my partner, and we did a lot of buildings together. But so we go to Chicago, and it's windy there a lot. So we're just like, okay, we'll go do some recon. We'll go check out some stuff. And we did that, and we got into more higher security buildings as we went along, and it was still windy. So we weren't able to jump. And so we said, let's just try something that's probably impossible. Let's just go and take a look and see how far we get, and then so we looked at all the tallest buildings there, and the Trump Tower is the third tallest building in the country. Sears Tower is a little bit bigger, I think, and then that World Trade Center is the tallest. So we go in, and actually we get pretty far on our first access attempt. And we came to realize later that the Trump Tower is actually 3 buildings. So it's a hotel on the bottom, and then the middle section is its own residential section, and then the top section is a high-end residential, and they're all separated from each other with their own security measures. So actually you're breaking into 3 buildings to get to the top of that building. And so that we kind of learned as we went. It took us about a week, honestly, of going back and forth with different disguises and tools, and switching stairwells and taking notes. And we'd build these Google Earth files all the time together. That Kyle's a EOD chief in the Navy, very high ranking, and been doing it for a long time. And so his mindset for this kind of strategy is really detailed oriented, and taught me how to approach urban that way as well. So anyway, we made it all the way to the roof hatch one time, and we're looking at the roof hatch and seeing this thing, and we could see there's a camera pointing at it, probably motion sensor camera. So we knew we had a limited amount of time to get access to that roof hatch. And once that was on, it was full. It was game on. So we called the locals, and we said, look, we're in your town, and I'm going to apologize right now, but we're going to probably burn your city for a while. But this is a massive jump. Like, we can do it, and we're inviting any of you guys that want to do it. You're welcome to come with us, and we will take you and show you. This is a once in a lifetime kind of thing. And only one guy came with us, this guy Paul, and I gave him instructions how to find us. We were hiding in a maintenance hallway on the 91st floor for I don't know, 2 or 3 hours. We'd had a steak dinner at the Trump Tower restaurant, paying customers. That was nice. And had business suits on, and we had our rigs in suitcases, and we had to climb, I don't know how many flights of stairs. It was a lot. And then in the end, we had to hide for hours to just let it get later at nighttime. So the whole time I'm freaking out, just panicking and thinking, oh, we're for sure getting arrested. Like, this is the only way this is going down. And, I think Kyle was playing like Robot Unicorn or something on his phone, just super relaxed. He's been on 3 tours, and, the guy's like, just no stress at all. So he put things into perspective. Anyway, Paul finds us, and we had tracksuits. The building's 1,200 feet. And so we threw on, old school 2-piece Phoenix Fly tracksuits, and it was game on, man. We got up to that hatch. We had planned to. We thought it might take too long to actually pick the lock, so we took pictures of the lock, and we bought an exact replica of the lock. And the idea was for us to do a switch, basically take the original lock off and put our lock on it. We wanted to try to make it repeatable, right? We kind of had that idea that, man, wouldn't that be cool if after we leave Chicago, we could give the keys to someone here that's local, and go, here you go, you're welcome. Like, now you can do it. It didn't go that as planned, actually. So we got up there and removed the lock, and then we're about to putting our lock on there. And in that process, we could hear the stairwell. We didn't know there was a security station, I think 2 flights below us. So actually, one of the guards was watching that camera. I'm sure it flipped on the screen, with our us presence there. And so with no time at all, we had a security coming up the stairs. So we had to bail, basically. Had to climb out that thing, had to jump down this 20-foot section onto the roof. And it's pretty windy up there, but we had talked to our ground crew ahead of time. We had a lot of planning around that too. So Chicago has a bunch of underground highways that are right below the surface there, and we're right next to the Chicago River where the Trump Tower is, and we're tracking over the Chicago River, and we're landing on the opposite side. And right there's a stairwell that goes down into the entrance of the underground highways, and there's just very nice of them to leave a little pull-off spot right there. So we call our ground crew, there she drives up and gets into that location. So basically once we land, we can just run down these stairs and then get into this underground highway. And so anyone that saw us or had any they couldn't even tell where we got in a car or any of that, because we accessed this underground highway. So yeah, me and Kyle go together. I get a great track on. Kyle tracks like a set of car keys, so he makes me look awesome. And Paul went first, actually, and Paul was slick. It was one of the more gangster moves I've ever seen. He has a 180. He does not track very well. Has a pretty good delay. 180, turns it around. He doesn't make it over the river. He lands on the cross section of the river. There's a little bridge going over the river, and then he hails a taxi, and he's gone, dude, in like 30 seconds. Like I was like, wow, that was amazing. Awesome. All right, cool. So then we get in our getaway car, and this is great, because Kyle's is my hero, is my mentor for urban, one of the most coolest and collected jumpers I've ever met. And as soon as we were driving away, he's just outside of the window, just puking his brains out, just like so much adrenaline and just intensity, and the guy just kept it all down. And then as soon as we were out, he's just hurling outside of the window as we're driving away.
Oh man,
it was so awesome. We thought we did pretty good, like nobody, pretty clean, and then we didn't know that someone had called it in, and so it became the headline of every news channel and paper across the country. And we wake up in the morning thinking we have a nice relaxed morning, and then we turn on the TV and we're on like every news station possible. They had pictures of us that we'd one of the cameras in the stairwell we had missed, and so they had pictures of us all dressed up nice with our suitcases and APB out for us and all of that stuff. So it became we got to get out of this state like now. And so that was another whole section of that experience, is tossing a bunch of tools in a river and flying back to Colorado with hats on, and
Groucho Marx style, so that the cameras don't see your face, right?
Like full experience for sure.
Well, I got a question on that. The fallout was pretty big, and I remember seeing all of this on the news. Can you just fill us in again on what year this all happened?
Yeah, it was 2012. So, it was 5-year statute of limitation for that. So I didn't talk about it for a while. Waited for all of that to expire, basically. So at this point, it's free game, and also Kyle was very much involved in all his military stuff, and he's about to retire. So I think it's a fair game to bring it all out into the open right now. And I'm not really a big Trump fan, so I wouldn't mind, if he does run for president again, just kind of releasing that video kind of somewhere, someone's, different IP or something like that, and just being like, yeah, you think this guy can protect you guys from, terrorists and Mexicans, and he can't even defend his own building from a couple of base jumpers.
Yeah, that was all post 9/11 protocols too, which is why that was such a huge deal, because you guys broke into what was supposed to be one of the highest security buildings in the country, and just kind of did it on a whim as some fun prank.
It was wild. I mean, we just couldn't believe we pulled it off. And a couple months later, that's when Marco and those guys jumped the World Trade Center. I actually got invited on that load, and I thought I was like, there's no way, dude, there's no way you guys are pulling that off. And they did. They just got screwed in the end by all the surveillance cameras and everything. They put the piece together and ended up raiding their houses like a month later or something like that. And
yeah, how did you guys avoid that?
I think that we got lucky with just our planning on the surveillance. They just really didn't have enough data on us. They went to Skydive Chicago. They asked a bunch of jumpers, if they knew who we were and all that kind of stuff. And so they did a little bit of investigation for a while, and then it just kind of petered out, and the next news story was on the TV. So we got lucky that way, but I just didn't go back to Illinois for 5 years.
You said that as soon as you opened up the hatch that they were coming. How did you know they were coming?
You could hear them. So you could hear like the door open, like just like a level below us, where it's like a big engine room we're in, and then there's the stairwells just below us, and you could hear the door fling open and people start running up the stairs.
Oh shit.
And
Okay.
so that was
It's time
like,
to
okay,
go.
well this I'm not. Yep, that's either I'm jumping or I'm going to jail. That's the only choice now at this point. So yeah, and it was awesome. I got like a good 10-second track off of it, and I was super stoked. That was so yeah. We were driving away, and I was like, that was it. That was probably the pinnacle. I probably just got to the top, and it's probably like nice smooth ride down from here. But yeah, that was kind of sealed the deal for me with urban. It had already happened for me because of my experience out in Hawaii, and we can talk about that whenever. But that was kind of how I built my passion for urban was going out to Hawaii, and I was doing tandems out there, skydive Hawaii. I met and Kyle Dewey. Me and him had started jumping around the same time, 13, 14 years ago. And he said, yeah, man, you want to learn like the dark arts. You want to learn how to be an urban jumper. And I was like, yes, I do. And he's like, he had all these tactical. So he's he trained by the military pretty heavily. And had all these tactical books on urban warfare and all this stuff like that, and a lot of it was breaching protocol and how to get into buildings and out of buildings. And he's like, okay, well, you got to read this book, this book, this book, and this book, and then we'll start talking from there. And
do you remember those books? What were those books?
There was some kind of military, like some of them were manuals, some of them were like like printed out, and some of them were actually like hardbacks. I can't remember exactly the details of that, but he made me read them though.
So I'm assuming that there's like they were teaching a softer approach to enter a door and
yes,
locks before putting an explosive on it.
Exactly. All of the attempts to basically bypass security, and that's kind of your main objective with urban. Is it's much more time consuming if you have to actually focus on the security details that they have on the door or the gate or whatever kind of protocol they have. It's much more effective to find the loophole with like to bypass, and there's lots of bypass tools where you're not even attacking the main problem, whether it be a lock or an electronic system. You're finding a weakness within that whole system, and strangely enough, they're most 100% of the time. And some of them are harder to find than others, but it's just like in Star Wars when there's like this massively powerful Death Star planet that can kill planets, and it happens to have this little torpedo chute that these guys could fly down this canyon and within the Death Star, and then just shoot these torpedoes down this hatch and blow up the whole Death Star kind of thing. That's kind of how it is in urban. There's always that like torpedo like tube that you can find if you look hard enough. And that's really kind of your main goal in urban is to figure out where that weakness is. So yeah, anyway, I spent 6 months out there, 7 months out there with him. When I first showed up to Hawaii, I think there was 6 or 7 buildings that had been jumped regularly in Honolulu, Waikiki. And when I left, I think there was 37 buildings that were being jumped. And before Kyle left the island, there was 50 buildings that he had jumped. So he opened 43 buildings there, and I was there for probably 30 of them. And so, yeah, it was the same situation as Chicago. It was windy a lot in Hawaii, so we just do recon. And that's one of my favorite parts of urban. Really, it's the magnificent hidden gem within it that you don't think about too much until you really get involved in it. So much, it's a moving chessboard is what urban is. There's you go and you build a mental map of a site, right? So your first approach is coming to the site, doing an assessment of it from the exterior, making notes about any kind of hazards in the way, whether it be power lines or trees or train lines or whatever, that kind of stuff. And then obviously checking to see what the wind patterns are usually, because it changes greatly within a cityscape. You can look on your weather map and you can see what the wind speeds are for that particular night that you want to jump, but it can vary much in within the whole cityscape itself, because wind gets kind of venturied through the different structures, kind of like when a river's running and it turns into whitewater rapids. It's because it's getting funneled, that the water's getting funneled into a tight location. So that plays a part. And then obviously from that point, you're trying to learn how to access the building. Hotels are generally the easiest just because they're used to traffic. Residential is the next, and then corporate, business are generally the hardest. And so then you're planning accordingly to that. How do I get access without being seen? How do I get to the roof? Roof access? What kind of tools do I need to make that happen? What kind of security measures do they have, whether it be surveillance or whether it be rotating guards? All of that stuff you take notes about and you watch. Sometimes I'll sit at a building for a couple hours and just watch everything, so that I can see exactly the whole mental map of the area. And it's saved me before. I've gotten into a 42-story chase before within a building, and because I'd done so much homework on the building ahead of time, I knew that building better than the guard did, so I was able to outsmart him within the building and then escape the building without getting caught. It was massive. There was like 5 guards chasing us. That was a crazy one. So yeah, I spent all that time with him out there, and that really, we'd get few nights where it was 0 wind, and when that happened, we had a laundry list already built. We had a Google Earth file, and with pins, and you could click on the pins, and it would drop down all the information that you need to access that building, what kind of tools you need. Everything was there. And so then we would just go and we'd jump till it was daylight. We'd go and we'd just go all night and jump 3 to 5 buildings in a night. Just go and smash them out. And then pass on that information to local jumpers and people. And so that was really kind of like the hallmark, like the staple of my experience that really kind of solidified, me as an urban jumper. And that was what I wanted to focus on. And then back in the day when we were learning, it wasn't, wingsuiting was just kind of coming out. It was just kind of really people getting mainstreamed at that point. I was watching Shane McConkey and all those guys, flying like tiny suits off of big fjords in Norway and stuff. And those proxy videos were first coming out when I was getting into the sport. So the progression back then was quite different. The progression in base jumping was jump off a bridge, find a mentor. These big classes didn't really exist as much as they do now. So I really kind of want to talk about that too, because I think mentorship is a very important part of jumping, and it's kind of been lost with how many different classes and courses and things you can do now, which is, I think, also great. But especially in urban, there's none of those classes. There's no one teaching that stuff, and so you're kind of going in blind every time, and all this very valuable information from the generations ahead of you never gets passed down.
Well, let's start on some of that. And before we get into the tools and tricks and tips, maybe you can mentor all of us by giving us some of the ethics involved in jumping urban.
Yeah. Yeah, and that has kind of evolved over time. When I first got into the sport, or urban, trying to find someone to teach you how to get to a building or find a building or give you information about a building was practically impossible. Like it was, you had to prove yourself, like, I don't know, over and over and over and over again somehow, without having the experience or the data to be able to prove yourself in the first place. So trying to get into the building scene when I first started was really hard, actually. And in the end, it was what made me a really good urban jumper, because I was like, well, okay, fine. If no one wants to show me, I'm just going to go and start jumping these things and figure it out for myself. And so that's what I did. And I just started going and opening new buildings. And that really is a valuable asset to learning how to be a good jumper with whatever kind of objects you're jumping, is actually opening your own exit points and knowing what it's like to go through that process. To actually, there's no data, there's no one to give you any tips, and you have to kind of do all the logic yourself and build that map. So when I started, it was basically no one talked about it. It was, no one showed the videos, no one did anything. It was just kind of like the super duper secret thing you could do in base. And you had to find someone like that would trust you enough to give you this information, and then you would kind of team up with a very limited amount of people, usually 1 or 2 people, and that became kind of my scene was just getting into that very, very tiny little subculture of base jumping.
And that's what I'm talking about when it's like, when you're talking about they need to trust you. And along the ethical line of questioning, I'm wondering, what are they trusting you not to do here?
I mean, not to burn the main idea with the main secrecy around urban, obviously, was because these are high security, high profile, objects to jump off. And so the idea was that the best jump was one that never got talked about or known about, because it meant that it was repeatable. So that was the idea. When you found a good building, the idea was to be able to get in and out without damaging any property, without being seen, and pulling off the jump, and then being able to go back a week later if you wanted to, and you could still jump the same object without any new repercussions, because you were invisible the whole time. And so that's kind of that was very, it's still true like that, not to the extent that it was when I started, but that really kind of made it so it was a very secretive thing. And if anyone, if you posted a video, for instance, or something like that, you get, people would shit down your neck about it. And so it was very much this, kind of hush hush, talk within the community that, if who was jumping, then and if you don't, you don't. And I kind of I kind of rubbed against that a little bit, actually. I didn't necessarily agree with that whole principle. I wanted to make it the information more open to people that were passionate and had the skill set to get into, because the way when we started was you jumped a bridge, the next one was an antenna, right? And then you got to a cliff, which is, because you're just dealing with the difficulties of the object. So, cliff and a building being more technical than an antenna and a bridge. So that was the natural progression. And when you got, the building was the last thing you typically got, and that was kind of to make your base number, to get your base number. And so, it's progressing down the technical aspects of the objects, and the building was the last one. So that was kind of like the holy grail for a long time, before wingsuit proximity flying came into the picture and all that. It was getting your building was kind of like the moment, you're just like super stoked and get your base number. And it's kind of the pinnacle of your experience at that time.
And what led you to do base? What led you to attack buildings as your primary mode of jumping after that? Because I remember back in the day, your reputation was that you would come into town, commune with some of the locals, and then open more buildings in like 1 week than most of the locals had done in their entire career.
Yeah, obsessive, I guess, personality type. I have that type. I get fixated on something and I just tunnel vision it, and that for me was a really healthy outlet for my personality type. And was urban to me was just this such a, I got into base jumping for probably different reasons than other people have. The reason I got into base jumping is because I saw it as this kind of rebel sport that was kind of pushing back against society and mainstream idealism. And, it was a silent and respectful, peaceful way to reject what I think is a lot of problems within society. And so that was my attraction to it initially, was I wanted to find something where I could have my own silent kind of rebellion. And so urban really represents that for me. Urban has all of the criteria there. It's people, you're in the concrete jungle, you're basically in the heart of, these epicenters of kind of what we see, a lot of people see as a wrong, or problems within society is kind of built. It kind of represents a lot of that, and being able to get through it and unseen, and have this objective to jump and get away. It really kind of solidified what I identified with base jumping. Base jumping now has become much more of a mainstream sport, and people are, real athletes are getting into it to be athletes, to get sponsored, to get noticed, to do all this stuff. When I got into it, it was just a very, very much a very fringe, idea, and it was, considered very reckless and kind of out of the norm. And now it's much more accepted and much more mainstream. And so that was my attraction to it, for sure.
The description of what you give there, you were looking for that before you found base? I mean,
I was definitely looking for that before I found base. Yeah.
Wow. What are some of the other things that popped up on your radar before you landed on base? I'm curious, because that seems very specific.
Yeah. So, I mean, anything that kind of put me in that zone, really. So I road race professionally for a while. I used to, going around tracks and dragging knee and doing all that stuff.
Motorcycles.
Motorcycles, yep. So high speed motorcycles, riding, but anything that kind of put me in that zone. And so and that really ties back to my spirituality, I guess you could say. I believe that we're here for a purpose, that we're not just in these meat puppets for no reason. There must be something higher. There must be a higher reason than just coming here to work and have a family and kind of go through the natural progression that we're taught. So I really got heavily into, when I was in college, I got into comparative religion. I got into studying different kinds of meditation and different kind of Eastern philosophies. I got into nutrition. I got into many things like that I was really searching for answers all the time in my life. Like, what am I doing here? What is the purpose of this whole experience? So I would dig very deep into the philosophy of life and, the concepts behind just the daily normal experience that we're on. And that really kind of, I saw in base jumping, I saw that connection there. There was something there that was very powerful, very spiritual, when you jump. And I think that's a big part of why I was attracted to it in the first place. And it's hard to catch in the beginning, because it's such a kind of, chemical soup, such a cocktail of emotions and feelings that come up in such a very short amount of time when you're in the experience of jumping. But after some time of really kind of being in the sport and repeating this process over and over, I was able to understand something very deep and powerful that was happening within those few seconds, especially the seconds that you leave an object and before your parachute's out. There's this very critical time in your consciousness that a lot of things happen, I think, that really kind of transfer over to me understanding my life in a much more profound way than I did before jumping. And so I started realizing that I was less addicted to or needing the adrenaline or the high or anything from that. Those are kind of byproducts of the experience. But really, the hidden gem for me was the information that I learned about myself in those few moments of accepting your mortality, of accepting your life, kind of in the surrender at the same time, realizing that you have to make an action to stay alive at that point. And so there's a very much a deep sense of peace and gratitude and things that come in those moments of realizing that you have consciously decided to make a decision to put yourself in imminent danger until you make another action to save your own life. And so there's a very nice flow state and sense of awareness that I really learned to observe by kind of going back in my mind after the jumps and really kind of reliving them in my mind and understanding that, wow, that is such a powerful moment right there. How much it taught me about just day-to-day life. And I'm 45 now, man. This life has gone by quick already. And I'm starting to, my mom's 70. I'm starting to see how time is just creeps up on you so quickly. And so really it's applied to my life in the sense of whenever I see my friends, I tell them I love them. I give them a hug. I make sure I'm like meaningful and deep with people in every moment that I can be, because you just don't know. And, obviously you guys all know we've all lost really good friends along the way in this sport. And, we've had to face death and what it means and to be alive much earlier than most people have because of this activity. So I think it's a very important thing for every jumper to contemplate, and to talk about and to realize kind of, the depth of this activity can affect you.
Well, we're talking about every jumper. If we can bring the conversation a little more practical side and go through a bit of a progression of how somebody could get into urban base jumping, maybe you can start with how one proves themselves to someone like you who has the keys to the castles.
I mean, definitely, passion and intention is a big part. For me, you don't necessarily have to have the good skill set right off the bat, because not everyone is, a brilliant, quick learner. I'm always jealous of my friends that are just like, oh yeah, I picked that up within a week. I was like, what? It took me months to figure out. So that's not always the case. But what is important is the drive and the dedication and the willingness to learn. Is to remain humble, no matter and for me, if I don't care if I've got 100 more buildings than you do. If you come and you teach me something on a building that I didn't think about before, I'm going to listen. I'm going to try to apply it, and see if it makes sense to my data and my skill set. So I think that's really kind of the main thing. Get rid of the ego, get rid of like, oh, I got to be this good. I got to show off and I got to prove myself that way. It's like remain humble, remain open. I want to see that you're putting the pieces together, like I want to be able to see there's a thought process there. It's not about just an activity that makes you cool or gives you credit or status or any of that kind of stuff. It's about learning process and an ability to calculate risk. I think that's probably the main key ingredient for base jumping is the ability to calculate risk. If you can do that well, then you'll stay alive for a long time in base jumping. And so the minute you get ahead of yourself, or you doubt yourself, or you start to kind of move too far outside of your box, that things can go south. So I really do believe that I always am pushing myself to be a better jumper, but I also know the limits of that push within each jump. And that's something that you learn as you go along. I think everyone's first couple of years in jumping is pretty wild. I know mine was. And I was, managed to survive it basically just by luck mostly. And after that, I changed my approach pretty heavily. I had a near-death experience in my second year of jumping, and it really changed my whole approach to this whole.
You want to tell us about that one?
Yeah, it was intense, man. I was in Glenwood Springs in Colorado, and it's a nice exit there that Hank Kaler opened up a long time ago. And we went there, and there was a nice right to left wind at the exit point. And I know at that time I thought I was invincible. I could do whatever I wanted. And I did a gainer and had a weak pitch. And on that pitch, the bridle blew across my waist to the other direction. And so I was towing my bridle, as I came around in the rotation, I'm towing my bridle, and there's no way I'm going to get anything out. And I think it was about 6 or 7 seconds to impact on that jump. And, so I'm just kicking and flailing, no airspeed at all. Just basically like, wow, this is it. Like, this is how you go, bud. And I saw the pine trees go by, and those pine trees are like, 60, 70 feet tall. Still on my back. And at that point, I knew I was dead. Like, and that, dude, that whole, like, when you look below that landing area or that jump, the whole talus is just these gnarly, like 7-8 foot boulders, like car size boulders everywhere. And like, there's just, when you look at it, you're like, okay, that's not an out. If I have an off heading, like, that's not an out. I got to go fly somewhere else. It's definitely no go place to go. That was where I was heading to. So anyway, I saw the trees go by, and in my mind, I knew I was dead. And actually, this is what saved my life: is I completely relaxed. I don't know how I did it, but it was a very quick moment of a second that I just relaxed. Like, kind of like, when you see like an antelope about to get hit by a tiger, and the antelope just completely goes limp. And that's what I did. I just said, okay, well, this is it. I'm looking up at the sky, and I had this whole thing happen, man. I had the whole life flash before my eyes thing. I saw crazy stuff of my childhood and stuff I couldn't remember before. I unpacked this all months after this. But anyway, so as I relaxed, that's what cleared the bridle, and a parachute came out, and actually I hit the ground on my head. I hadn't even swung around in the harness yet from the line stretch, and I hit in the only sand patch that was on that fucking talus. Like just this little 3x3 sandbox is where I hit on my head upside down, and didn't, that was it. Anywhere else I would have landed within a 5 foot radius, I would be dead for sure. So yeah, I went to the hospital, and somehow I didn't break anything, and I was just kind of had a lot of muscle damage, and actually I didn't have insurance at the time, and the lady knew what happened, and she one of the nurses pushed me out the back of the hospital, and I was like, what is going on? She's like, it's your lucky day, pal. Like, go buy a lottery ticket, and didn't charge me a dime for
get lost.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Well, glad you survived that one.
Yeah, that really changed everything for me, for sure.
How did you? I wanted to the part about mentorship too, because I think this is a pretty potent I think this is a pretty potent topic. How did you find Kyle?
So Kyle, we kind of found each other. Actually, we both ended up in Arizona of all places. I'd moved out there, and that's where I met Matt Froelich too. And Matt Froelich was a big mentor of mine. He kind of taught me a lot about just object awareness and spatial awareness and all the things I kind of were my kind of foundation for jumping. And then Kyle was my urban kind of mentor, was the guy that really took me on there. And actually me and Kyle started jumping with Matt Froelich. Me and Kyle we were both starting out around the same time, same jump numbers. And I met him on jump in actually Camelback in Arizona, that little flick over there, if everyone does, about 240. And then from that point on, we just kind of clicked, and which is funny because he's a total military mind, like Sith Lord kind of guy. And I'm like this kind of hippie spiritual, like way on that kind of end. And somehow we met in the middle with jumping, and we became really good friends. And he invited me out to Hawaii. Actually, we'd done a couple buildings together, and he said, "Hey man, you want to come out here? We can really tear it up." And so I got a job out of Skydive Hawaii, and that was the beginning of our gnarly friendship together. We did a lot of. I learned so much from that guy. It's incredibly experienced in his field of access work.
Yeah, can you fill us in on some of that access stuff? Because we've touched on it several times. We haven't delved into it very much.
Yeah.
Maybe you can give us some of the skill sets that you developed with him that might be helpful for other people to hear so they can start developing those skill sets.
Definitely. So, people get caught up on or obsessed about thinking they need to learn how to pick locks really well, or they need to learn the RFID kind of, fob stuff, which is all, nice stuff to know. But your main kind of bread and butter within accessing buildings is really a couple of tools, and then just having a good head on your shoulders, and building a really good mental map for every jump that you do. I've on-sited a couple of buildings before where I didn't do any homework ahead of time, and it was really not a great experience for me. I chose not to do that anymore. It's much better if you have to spend, you have to dedicate time and effort to an urban jump. And that's why there's not a lot of people that do it, is you really have to kind of go back to these sites and build a relationship with it. And that's the best advice I can give, is to build a relationship with the object, with the building. So it's almost like you live there, or like you go and do business there. It's that's you want to have that kind of relationship interaction with it, so that when you go into a place, you're not blind and you have a ton of information and data at your fingertips, and when it's good and when it's not good. I've walked down more buildings than I've jumped, for sure. And it's, there's a lot of times where it just doesn't feel right. There's things aren't lining up. Something unexpected is there that you didn't account for, that you need more data about, to really be successful. And so, if you do all these jumps and then not get rolled, it's a lot of work. So that's my main kind of, advice for that, is to really dedicate yourself to the object, build a it's like having a partner, you're building. It's like a romance that you have with this object, and that's so that it becomes this thing that you really kind of learn how it smells and it tastes and it feels, and all the nuances that this particular building has. That's something that I really like. It's like a love affair that I have with these objects when I really get into it.
So you're really describing this as like getting to know like somebody that you'd like to have sex with. It's like if you just go in right off the bat to try and like jump into their pants, like it's not going to work, But
no, man, you need to know what kind of perfume they like. You need to know what kind of flowers they're into. You kind of know what kind of movies they want to watch. Like it's all of that.
And while we're talking about tools, where does the grappling hook come into play as far as necessary tool?
The grappling gun.
Yeah, we have used the grappling hook a couple of times, actually.
Yeah, dude, Laurent, we're not even joking, man. Dude, this was one of the things that I learned from Jamie, was that most of the security in buildings happens in the first two floors.
Definitely.
And if you can bypass those first two floors, pretty much the rest of the thing is open season.
Totally.
And a lot of these buildings ended up having like exterior staircases, or they'd have fire escapes or something like this. And we'd actually roll up to them with a grappling hook and just toss that thing into the second floor, walk up the wall, and be done with it.
Yeah. Yeah. This is what we were talking about earlier, is thinking outside of the box, not looking at the security problem that is there to defeat you. It's looking around the security problem. So that's exactly like that. That's an example of that. I've used aid ladders before with the tent pole connected to the aid ladder, and then I can open the tent pole up and I can connect it up to a fire escape that's 10, 15 feet up away from the ground floor, and then just use that to climb up and fold the tent pole, and you've got this little portable ladder in your pocket that you can use and to access things like that. So yeah, that's there's some of them are very specific, like tools that you need to invent or come up with to defeat the problem. But it's always that mindset that you're looking around, because those it's really it's very funny how they place such heavy security measures on what they think to be the only way to get into a building. And so you'll find that access point and be like, oh yeah, they've put some thought into this. They put a lot of attention to the kind of deterrent devices. And then you walk around the corner and there's a window that's 10 feet up that has no protection on it, and it goes into a stairwell in the parking lot. Parking lot gives you access to the building. Next thing you know, you've pieced your way up into the rooftop. So it's always that mindset that really kind of gets you to a building top. Is never, when you get to the place where you're stuck, go around it, go find another way. And I cannot stress enough. Like, dude, I've so many times I've gotten to a building like, oh wow, these guys really thought of everything, and they don't. There's always that little porthole that gets you to the place you want to go. You just have to look hard enough for it, and there's some tools that, like, for instance, like an under the door tool is probably the most used one that we use. It's most roof doors are latch doors, and by fire code they have to open from the outside of the roof. So if like there's a fire in the building, the helicopter from the fire department can land on the rooftop and like access the building, right? But so they're locked from the inside and they open from the outside. These are like giant coat hangers, basically with a string on it, and you're putting it under the door, and it's hitting the back. You're getting it to the back side of the door where the latch is, and then you got to line it up and be able to. And then you're pulling on the string, underneath the door, and that's opening the door latch from the outside that way. And these things you can bend them up and you can jump with them and stuff. So one's a very good one that we use that opens a lot of doors. Definitely, like, just simple tools that you think of, like the credit card kind of stuff, or like
the shove it tool.
There's shove it tool that's kind of more meteor on steroids version of that. Sometimes
what's the shove it tool? What's that? Let me just preface these questions, because like I'm basically an alpine skydiver. Like I have
totally.
One building, so all this. I mean, like, people have asked us to have someone like you on because it's this micro niche in the sport of base jumping.
Yeah,
and it's something that I totally missed. So please.
Yeah, so a shove it tool is it's kind of a crude tool. It's basically just a metal, looks like a shank, basically like a thin ruler size tool that you make. If you don't just buy it online, but you can. But I make a lot of my own, and basically that gets it so you can get under the door, like where the door latch is, and where the what's the part on the door? What would you call it? Where the latch is inside the door, the part that holds the door in place. I can't remember.
It's not the slide. It's not the bolt, but it's
not the bolt, but like
where connected to the handle of it.
So it's like a slim jim
the mechanism that holds the door in place, basically, right?
Yeah.
When the door's in the latch, like that.
That gets retracted when you turn the doorknob.
Yes, when you pull on a doorknob or turn a doorknob, it gets retracted and the door opens, right? So, but when that's locked or has something in place to stop you from being able to get behind it, a shove it tool, essentially you're getting behind the latch system, and then you're manually opening it from behind it, so that the mechanism of the door knob doesn't have to operate. You're manually doing it, overriding it, basically. So it's a pretty crude tool, but it works surprisingly enough on a lot of doors, because a lot of these doors, when they get installed, they're not really thinking so much that it has to be perfect, for all of these numbers to line up to be a super tight door. That's very uncommon to find doors like that. And even there's like things like you can place a piece. There's these tools that you can pump up. There's a flat piece of plastic you can shove inside of a door, and then you can pump it up manually, and that can actually create enough space in the door. So you're moving the door with this air pump, and
a little door shim.
Well, door shim, basically, yeah. So you're creating enough space to access the parts of the door mechanism that you need to open. So there's a lot of little tips and tricks that you kind of learn along the way, and that's why it's so important to do the homework ahead of time, because then also, these tools, if you get caught with them, it's extra fines for you and going to jail and whatever kind of stuff.
Let's talk about that for a second, because while we're on the subject of tools, it's nice to mention that everyone should check out the legality of them. As Jamie just mentioned, some of them are illegal just to have on you. Totally. And so, Jamie, how did you mitigate that kind of risk?
I mean, in an ideal world and you would not jump with the tools that you have. It's best if you can bring someone up with you, like a ground crew or someone that's not jumping, like say your getaway driver, because very oftentimes we have a getaway driver if it's a high security building and we're landing in a place where we're going to have security on us quickly, and you've got someone on the ground that is watching, their eyes on the ground for you. They're giving you information before you jump. You're calling them 2 minutes before you're going to jump, and you doing a status check on what's going on the ground with the ground winds and general situation down there. And then, telling them not to contact you unless, they see something that needs to be talked about. So basically, if you can, then you have them come up with you and you give them the tools after you access the problem, and they take the tools back down out of the building so that you're not jumping with the tools. Because if you get caught with the tools afterwards, that's more legal problems for you. And a lot of them actually create felonies, whereas totally. most of the time, if you're jumping a building, it's a misdemeanor, and honestly, most of the time they don't care and they think it's cool and they want to just kick you off the property. That's most of the time what happens.
And I've got a couple of notes on that one for anyone that's interested in trying to skirt this legality. If you don't have a Kyle Dewey in your life, one thing to do is to just go to a locksmith. And most of the locksmiths, like local locksmiths in your town, will have apprentices and people that they're teaching how to pick locks just for fun. And that's a really cool thing to just get in with them and say, like, hey, I'm just interested in this as a hobby. I'd like to know how to pick high security locks. And they could take you on as an apprentice, or they could just help you. And then the second step is to register yourself with local law enforcement once you've got that inroad with somebody at a locksmith's. And it's kind of a catch-22, because you're putting your name on a list for sure. But what that list does is allow you to roam freely about society with all of these tools without getting arrested by the cops. Now, the caveat to that is obviously if you're using them for illegal purposes, then you're going to get arrested no matter what. But in the slim cases where you get caught on the street looking or trying to survey a building, or afterwards, after your parachutes are all packed up and you're driving away, then you do have at least some Teflon for somebody saying, hey, what are those?
Interesting.
Yeah. And there's for instance, hotels. Perfect loophole there. So the main thing, there's no rules except for in Nevada and New York City. Now they have actual ordinances against base jumping in city environments, but everywhere else there's no rules around that. It's just they're just going to try to throw trespassing on you, right? So if you walk into a hotel and you're jumping that, it's really good, nice little loophole. Go to the bar and buy a drink with your debit card or credit card, and you're a paying customer that night. So you're not trespassing anymore.
Can we talk about dealing with security versus the police and what it's like to run from both, and your advice on running from both?
Check your local authorities. For instance, I've only had one time where I got busted, and that was in Brazil, and I didn't know what the local laws there that were, and local laws there are you pay the cops money. They're all dirty cops there, and they all just want their bribery money. And so you do not run. If you're going to get caught by them, you just stop, give them money, and that would be the end of it. I learned that the hard way, and I started running from a cop on the beach, and he shot his gun in the air while he was chasing me. And so I stopped. Obviously, I'm like, oh, I'm going to get shot by Brazilian cop. And he ran up with a knife. I thought I was going to get stabbed. And
good. Damn.
And instead of doing that,
South America.
he grabbed my brand new Hey Duke and he just started raping it with his knife and just cut like 10 huge holes in my parachute. And he was just pissed that I was running, you know. He's like, why don't you know the rules? The rules are you just give me cash, right? That was a hilarious experience. I ended up going down to the station, me trying to do bribing the cop along the way. I carry $100 on me all the time when I'm jumping urban, just as bribery money in case that'll work. And so I give him $100. We get to the station. The hotel manager's there because I was a paying customer that night. All I did was I picked a lock, you know, so I didn't damage any property. I jumped, and then that was actually the cop caught me with the lockpick set. He had it in his pocket, and he knew that was leverage for him to get more money out of me, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, we make the deal, give him $100. Get to the station, and the hotel manager is there trying to bribe the cops to get me in trouble because there was nothing she could get me on. But I'd given them way more money than she did. You know, $100 there is kind of a lot of money.
Yeah.
So he's lying through his teeth when we get there. I don't know how the guy got on the roof. You guys must have left the door open. Like, you know, definitely your fault. So, you know, she kicks me out of the hotel. He drives me back to the hotel and get my stuff out. And the cop, the only English thing he said to me, he shakes my hand and he goes, God bless you. And when he does that, he slips me my lockpick set back. And I was like, okay, so that's how it works in Brazil. So you know that's a particular, like you go to Tijuana, for instance, any place like that's the kind of stuff you need to think about. That you need bribery money, right? United States, you know, you want to run, you want to get out of there, you know, you want to be faster than they are. Oftentimes, you know, security guards, they get paid, you know, $15 an hour or whatever. They're not that interested in trying to roll you. You know, they most of the time they just kind of chase you off or you know, try to make a scene that for you to leave quickly, but won't bother to actually pursue you. So dealing with security is actually a lot easier than you think. They're all so intrigued, you know, they're so bored and they're just sitting there every night, and then they see a couple parachutes slam open and fly off their building. They're like, what the, you know, like, whoa. So they're like more intrigued and stoked than they are wanting to bust you. So I've had a few experiences with that where they're just kind of like, all right, man, that was rad. Just get out of here. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, and then, so obviously, you know, the only time when cops get involved is when if you get caught and they ask the property owner, do you want to press charges on this guy for trespassing? And then that's the only time the cops get called. And sometimes if the cops get called and they can't contact and confirm that they want to do this, then they'll let you go as well. So you know, it's not, people are just scared of the idea. Oh, I'm going to get caught. Like, then there's going to be serious repercussions. There's actually a lot of wiggle room within that area to, you know, work your way out of a problem. It's just like you're doing when you're inside a building. So it's not over when it's over, when you think it's over. There's a lot of ways out of the experience still, even when you're dealing with security and cops.
Man, there's some good pieces of advice that I'd like to just touch on real fast. One that you said is keeping $100 in your pocket, which I think is excellent in the United States as well, because if you do that, you have the opportunity to, like, you know, pay some security guard or pay somebody that's like staying in the hotel for some help. And I think the second thing that I would always have in my pocket is a candy bar. And no shit, this was just to look less conspicuous, because like if you're like, you know, reconning a building, or you're in some like piece of the building that you're not supposed to, like in, you know, the stairwell or whatever, you know, cigarettes work too, but like just being able to pull something out of your pocket and just start like nonchalantly like eating or smoking it, like puts a lot of people at ease.
Definitely. No, that's I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, cigarettes, I used to carry those all the time for that. Even though I don't smoke, but one of the funniest stories is actually with Kyle Dewey, my urban mentor, and my buddy John Czar, and they were in a building in Hawaii, and they had all their tools laid out, you know, on the ground, and they were trying to get this door problem figured out. And a security comes in like a level below them and is like charging up the stairs, and so, you know, they're just panicking and they don't have time to put the tools away or anything. They just kind of kick it to the side, and they just look at each other and they just go for it, man. They just start tongue kissing, you know, and that yes, yeah. and it worked. The you know, the security came around the corner and was like, oh my god, like, totally, what are you guys doing? You can't be here, you know, you got to go do that somewhere else. And so, you know, that worked for them. Got him out of
I think the second important thing that you've brought up is that security guards are not generally there to roll you. Though you can run from them in the United States, they're not legally allowed to detain you physically.
They're not allowed to detain you. No, they're not.
And so, like, if somebody's standing in your way, just walk around them, be cordial. You don't have to, you don't have to shove them out of the way, and please don't physically assault them, but they're not allowed to physically restrain you. And so you can run your ass off. However, if you're like meeting with the LAPD, running from them is not a great idea. Like, if you haven't already created enough distance that you can just get away, like, they're within their rights to shoot you. And
Definitely, yeah.
Like, that's not something that you really want to invite. And most of the time, like Jamie said, they don't care. Like,
no,
they're trying to catch rapists and murderers and thieves, and like, you're an inconvenience to their day. They don't want to go back to the station and do paperwork on you unless you run from them, like in that Brazilian situation where they're just like, okay, screw this guy. We don't care what we're doing. Grab him.
Yeah. No, and so one of the actually, this is a great example. Is Adam Foster, who's a good friend of all of ours. He passed away like last year, and I went to his funeral, and so that was in Denver. In Denver, we were jumping this Hyatt. The Hyatt was like this go-to building. I think it has the record still. It's like 18 or 19 people like jumped off it at one time. And anyway, we used John Van Horn was a guy that took the lock off the roof hatch and made a key for it from one of his friends, was a locksmith, and they made like 5 copies of a key. And so all of us had a key to this thing, so we could just go up and open it and have ground crew lock the lock behind us. And we jumped this thing like I think I got my base number off it. I probably got like 50 people their base number off that building. So that was our go-to building. And anyway, Adam died and I had his ashes, and I was like, okay, I gotta go jump this thing again. So I go to the Hyatt and I case it, and I no one's really jumping urban there right now. A couple guys, and they said, well, yeah, there's a under the door tool. We're going a different way now, and it shouldn't be an issue. So I go and I do it, and they didn't know that since they'd gone and approached this building, silent alarms had been put on these doors. So I'm up on the roof. I've got a computer bag full of illegal tools, and and I'm out there in the middle of the day, just casing out this new exit point, whatever, to get Adam's ashes off there later on that night. And I'm coming down outside of the engine room, and I see 2 hotel managers just running up the stairwell. And my buddies managed to get out of the engine room in time and down the stairwell, and I was still up down climbing this ladder. And so I just like, well, I'm stuck. So I climb back up this ladder, and I'm hiding in this corner. The guys come into the engine room, they're walking around the elevator area and all that stuff, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, they're just going to do a sweep and cruise. And actually one of them decides to climb the ladder where I'm hiding. And he comes up, and I'm like, well, this is it. Like, so I pop up, and I just like, hey guys, how's it going? I'm like, what's up? And they're like, who the fuck are you? And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm with the GRI. I'm just doing a roof inspection right now. It's a 3:00 appointment. And they're like, we don't have a record of GRI and Gravity Research Institute. We don't have a record. We don't have a record of anyone by that name. He calls down, he talks to the front desk. He says, yeah, no one's checked you in. No one let you up here. How'd you get up here? And I said, oh yeah, it's a security guard. And I mentioned a guy that I'd seen, just kind of described him. And then so they're taking me down the elevator, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to get arrested for sure. And I'm thinking, and just trying not to sweat, just small talk with these guys. And I remember that there's another Hyatt like a block away from this Hyatt. And so I just like, kind of casually like, oh yeah, this is the Hyatt Regency, right? And they're like, oh no, man, this is the Grand Hyatt. I was like, oh, I thought, yeah, I was supposed to be at the Hyatt Regency. And they're like, oh man, that's just down the block over there. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, totally. So they walk me out the front lobby, and they point the Hyatt out to me, and they're like, yeah, man, you just got to go over that way. Like, have a good day. See you later. So
Did
you guys have legit cards? Did you guys have cards of like?
We do have cards, actually. Yeah. Yeah. We got pretty into the GRI thing. We had T-shirts and cards, and that's kind of Peter Conrad kind of came up with that originally. And so yeah, we've kind of continued that it works good because you've got a story, you got an MO, you're confident when you talk, and they don't want to believe you're up there trying to case a building to jump off it. They especially in the middle of the day, and you're dressed nice and
right, just so out of the realm of reality there. Like, who's doing that,
Let's get into some subterfuge, because I feel like a lot of people in my day approached buildings in full tactical gear which
Yeah, totally.
inherently
Yeah,
is like not very like, you're
full
not really
camo
blending.
outfit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
totally.
Can you tell us about dressing for success, blending in, creating that subterfuge, creating that storyline, so that like if the worst case scenario happens, you're not like and you actually
Yeah,
have
yeah.
something to offer?
Definitely. I mean, that's all part of the planning that I was talking about, like you're not just planning for success, you're also planning for failure. So you're also prepared for if worst case scenario happens, what if someone has a 180 and gets stuck up on a rooftop somewhere? What if, I can't make the main LZ and I've got a rendezvous with my ground crew later down the way? What if I'm getting chased? So those are all potential outcomes that I'm always planning for within my kind of mental map of the object that I'm jumping. So, and that does include outfit, costume design, set design. You know what I mean? Like you need to be dressed for the part. If it's a really super schwanky, 5-star, hotel or residential area, you want to look like you're rich. You want to walk in. I don't show off my tattoos. I wear a collared shirt. I wear something that's hiding my rig really well. I don't walk in with a stash bag on my back. I've got Andrea makes these really awesome stash bags that look like book bags. So that you just got a shoulder strap for them, and they got a book bag. They expand, where you can stash everything later. They're really well designed. They're really awesome bags, and we're
just talking like Andrea Chan, just for everybody
Chan,
listening.
Yep. Yeah, shout out to her for those things. Because security starts to know what stash bags look like, and that can give you away. And then they're just kind of tacky. They look like you're a robber when you walk in with just a big black bag on your back, So that's most of the time when they're suspicious of you, it's because they think you're trying to steal something. It's not because they think you're a jumper. They're just like, oh, that guy looks like out of place and he looks like he doesn't belong here. So that really helps a lot when you walk in and you're already dressing the part, and you look exactly like everyone else. I like that whole side of it as well. The whole espionage side of it, the whole kind of blending in and just kind of, you feel like you're in a James Bond movie or a Mission Impossible or whatever. It's that I love that whole feel to it. And I remember we took some of those guys that are filming, Scotty and Julia and Jimmy and Marta and Espen. And Amber and them, with this documentary they're making about base jumping, and they've been all filming legal objects forever. And finally, I took them on a legal building jump, and they were just they loved it. They're like, "Oh my God, this is so different than everything we've done before." Like it's the intensity and the stress of the legalities and all the things around it. It's a very different experience than just hiking up to an exit point and having that be the main point of concern. There's this whole moving picture around you the whole time, and the jump itself is just a part of it. And that's what I love about it. That's my obsession about it, is being able to create these mental maps to follow. And then, obviously having your story ahead of time is really important as well. What happens if I get rolled? What am I going to say? Because that's not the end. If that's the end, if you make it the end, it's not the end until you say it's the end, basically, And so if you can go in with confidence and with a good story, people are like, oh, okay, sorry, man. Like I mistaked you for someone else, and here's the front door and here's my card and call me next time and whatever, it's. So you can Jedi mind trick people, and if you can keep your calm and stay collected, and obviously, and inside my heart's beating 100, beats a second. I'm, in that state of adrenaline, but I'm able to maintain a composure. And I think that's a big part of base jumping in general, is being able to compartmentalize everyone has fear, right? That's normal. If you're getting to an exit point and you're not having some form of fear, in my opinion, that's not good. Fear isn't something to be scared of. It's not something to feel like it's kind of paralyze you or going to make you distracted or make bad decisions. The way I've developed fear now is, in the beginning of my jumping experience, it was kind of on the forefront of my experience when I was jumping. It was a very powerful energy that was there, and it was overwhelming, and I just kind of navigated around it barely, And now over the many years of jumping, I see it as this kind of data stream of information that's there, always in the background, telling me to stay safe and what my dangers are around me, but at the same time I'm able to maintain a clear mind and not attach myself to the information that the fear is giving me. So in a way, I see fear now as just another stream or form of data that's helping me stay safe. And it's not something that has to overpower me or has to get in the way of my ability to make clear and rational and good decisions while I'm jumping. So I see it more as my ally now than as an enemy or as something to overcome. And that's what I really learned from the years of jumping and how to manage fear. And that applies to urban experience as well, and the things that are scary outside of the jump.
Everything that you're talking about urban, I think equally applies to all other forms of jumping. Like through the different wingsuiters we've had on here and different slider down cliff jumpers, that is a commonality, is just having that mental map of all the what ifs.
Yeah, definitely.
But something else that's sort of flashing up or sparking my attention too is your level of self-awareness. And that's another commonality that's kind of sparked up through all these other discussions we've had on this podcast. And I'd like to have your opinion about some of the things that you've done to cultivate that personal awareness.
Yeah, and I'm sure everyone has their own methodology that works well for them. For me, it's been my desire to learn who I am and my position on the planet, what my gifts are, what my weaknesses are, being truthful to myself about those things, so I can develop the things that I'm weak in, and solidify and magnify and be able to give back the things that I'm really good at. And I think that's so important for base, especially, is because you don't get a second chance when you make a big mistake in base jumping. So oftentimes it just ends with fatality or getting really injured. So it's really important to know yourself, to know what your limits are, to know, like, for instance, I'm an okay wingsuit pilot. I'm not great, and I probably never will be. And I know that. So any wingsuit jumping I do is in a very much more open margin than my friends are that are, shredding proxy lines and whatever. That's something I'll probably never get into. And I have a lot of healthy respect for wingsuiting as well, because I've been around the sport for a while, and most of my friends are dead because of wingsuits. That's most of the people I've lost. It's because they were proxy flying. So I do have a certain amount of fear around wingsuiting for myself, and knowing that, man, these guys were way better than I am and they died. And what chance then do I have? So I'm very, when I'm in the wingsuit environment, I'm like, it's funny because I bring, you guys, I bring these badass wingsuiters to urban environment, and I watch them just like shit the bed, and I'm like, what, 100 meters? Are you serious? I'm like, oh man, it's so funny, like, to see how you take your person out of their element, how much that changes. So I really came to realize this is the thing I love. This is what I'm good at. This is what I can give back, or I don't want the objects to die. Wingsuiting is such a prevalent thing now that everyone just sees that on YouTube and like, okay, I'm going to get to that point. What do I need to do? The fastest route to get to that place, like, tell me how to do it. And so the four objects are kind of being lost, in my opinion. Like, there's still a lot of slider down jumpers, but it's just not so mainstream anymore, and people kind of just bypass it, do it to get to the place where they want a wingsuit. And I think I love the olds. I love how base jumping started, how its whole history. And we got into the sport young enough we know those guys still. We know the guys that, like, base 3 or whatever. Like, I met Jean Bonish, and she signed my logbook and talked to her. And so, I really hope that stays within the base community, that those doesn't get lost. For me, jumping new objects is my favorite. I rarely go back and jump the same object twice. If it's a really good one, I will.
Let's circle back to my question for a second. I love everything you're saying here, but I'd like to keep it on track. One of the things you mentioned earlier too was how you have walked down or hiked down or climbed down more buildings than you've actually jumped. And I think you sort of alluded to your use of intuition. And I think that's something that's pretty interesting, because for me, I don't actually have my head wrapped around it. Sometimes I just have a bad feeling, and I go with that. I'll usually have like this, 3 flags or strikes rule, where if 3 things that make me feel uneasy happen, it's just, there's no question about it. The whole mission is being canceled.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your personal intuition and your relationship with it?
That's something I developed largely outside of base jumping because I'm into spirituality. You know, I meditate every day. I believe in like connection to myself. You know, when you're out base jumping, no one's there to protect you except for yourself. If you got a good friend there that might, you know, do a good check on you and say, hey man, like, yeah, like your bridle's, you know, hanging out, or your BOC or whatever, stuff like that. But, you know, for the most part, it's your responsibility to take care of yourself in the base environment. You know, that's what I like about it as well. It's radical self-reliance, you know, and I that's something that I've learned to develop through my years on this planet is, you know thyself, you know what my limitations are, know the difference between fear and then intuition, because that can get mixed up sometimes. Sometimes you're just getting scared, sure, and you think that's a gut feeling, and it's not really a gut feeling. Or sometimes you're having a gut feeling and you're crediting that to being fear, and you're bypassing it, not listening to it. So that's a tricky one, you know, because fear is such a powerful emotion. So learning how to discern with yourself what's when your actual gut feeling is, your intuition is firing, and when you're just having normal and natural fear around the jump. Because
do you have a process for that?
Natural. I do you know, I visualize. I do a lot of visualization for jumping. I think it's really important. Before I do a jump, I basically meditate on it, and and that's a way of saying I close my eyes and I breathe deeply, and I imagine the whole flow state, and I actually in my mind I visualize the whole jump process from beginning to end, whether it be, you know, sneaking into a building or jumping off a cliff. I visualize everything around it, and I put intention into it. So I'm setting it out. I'm setting the vibration before I'm jumping in my mind's eye, and that manifests around when you do something. It's very different when you set intention in your life. This is something I do in a daily practice anyway. When I meditate in the morning, is I set my intention for the day, and I set my intention for what I want to happen. You know, so I'm putting it out there. I'm setting like an energetic pathway for these things to happen with less effort. And that I apply that to base jumping very much so. Before I do a jump, I visualize exactly what it's going to be like. I visualize everything working out the way it's supposed to, where I'm going to land, and you know, building a mental map in my mind already before it happens. And then obviously I'm also building ideas for outcomes that are not desirable too. So if I have off headings, what am I going to do? Where am I going to land? What are my alternate LZs? It's always building this very intricate, detailed mental map in my mind. And the reason I apply that into jumping is because I've noticed that it makes a huge difference in my life when I've applied it through meditation, through my intentions when I sit down in the morning to really kind of magnify my experience and to set pathways that are beneficial for me for the rest of the day. And I do think it's really paid off for me every time I've done that. And I've fallen out of practice before, and I've seen the difference. And so that's something that I think is a very powerful tool, is learning how to use your consciousness to set something in motion that you know, and in a desirable way, not focusing on the fears around the experience, but focusing on like a positive outcome.
And then does that allow you to differentiate between fear and other emotions that could be masquerading?
Yeah, because you've done so much work in your mind that your logic is clear, and when your logic is clear, then you can tell the difference between your fear and your intuition. When you basically you've taken all the possibilities of unexpectedness out of the equation, and then you're able to discern the difference much easier, because there's no lack of trust in what you've built in your mind. So that takes away a lot of the guesswork that way.
Are you scared of anything while you're jumping? Maybe I can ask this a different way, because we have this one written down. Are you scared of dying?
Yeah, sure.
We want to know the answer to that.
Sure.
But we also want to know what else you assign your fear to.
I mean, there's a physiological fear of dying that happens in your body when you're in a place of danger. That's normal. That's probably never going to go away from me, and it's healthy, I think. In my mind, in my contemplative mind, am I scared of dying? No. You know, and I've had near-death experiences. I've done ayahuasca in the jungle in the Amazon, and I've left my body before and seen what it's like after death. And I've had kind of ego deaths in the spiritual realm as well. I've been around enough death to understand it. So no, in the big picture, am I scared of dying? I'm not scared of dying. I would like to feel a sense of completion in my life before I die, and that probably, who knows if that'll ever happen or not. And I think that's a big question everyone should ask themselves: is if I die today, am I happy with what I've done? Do I feel complete? Can I take my last breath and be satisfied and leave this body in peace? And I think that's something that I think about a lot. So when it comes, because who knows when it's going to come? It could, with us, we could just survive base jumping this whole time and end up just dying, crossing the street one day. That's a possibility as well. So I always try to wake up and be thankful for what I've done and what I've accomplished so far, and not feel like the stress to be, have all these other goals that I have set out ahead of myself to be completed or not to be happy. So in that respect, I'm not scared of dying. I feel very privileged and very lucky to live the life we've got to live so far, and are such a strong community in base jumping. You guys it's my family. I could talk to Lo, who lives in France, and I could go and stay at his house one day, and go and he'd show me exit points and whatever, and then we'd all do that for each other from across the world, people we haven't seen in years. And that the sense of community there with base jumping has been such a privilege to be a part of. Something that I'm very honored to be around. And so for me, that's become the forefront of my experience in base is, this understanding of life and death and of individuality and expression and choices for all of us, personal choices that can actually lead to death, and respecting that in each of us. Understanding the impermanence of everything, and that's a big part of it. I'm a big Buddhist in that sense. I've done 10-day Vipassana meditations and sat in silence and understood that this thing, everything arises to pass away. So that's the natural progression of nature. That's how it works in this plane of existence that we're on, and I really apply that to my philosophy on jumping as well. So yeah, my physiological reaction to fear is always going to be there, but in my mind and in my heart, I'm not scared of dying. No.
Do you think that the strength of your visualization through jumping has been augmented through your use of psychedelics?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's been a big tool for me, plant medicine. I was introduced to it as a teenager with psilocybin, with mushrooms, and that really progressed my consciousness into something that I believed was happening. I kind of always thought there was more to reality than I was being taught. And I pursued that in many of my studies and fields of interest, and the psychedelics really turbo boosted that idea and gave me much more insight into consciousness and awareness. Multi-dimensional experiences that are outside of the time and space that we're presented with on a daily basis. So, and that really became something that helped me so much in my life. And I've had friends that are ex-military that have real serious PTSD and major trauma in their mind, and psychedelics have been a massive help to them through psilocybin, ayahuasca, many of these different plant medicines that really, really benefit the mind, because you go to a hospital to get your body fixed, but there's nowhere to get your mind fixed, and psychology has a kind of attempt to it, and therapy and counseling and all of that kind of stuff. But plant medicine really helps to rewire and heal the brain of damage that it has from trauma and from experiences in life that have a negative connotation on it. So that has become something that I've definitely applied to not only my life outside of base jumping, but also within base jumping as well. I'm a big advocate for my dad and dad's all alcoholics. I'm Scottish lineage, and I had to quit drinking. For me, it was something I had no control of. I couldn't just be a casual drinker and have one drink. It would be like 10 drinks every time. And so I actually microdosed on psilocybin for a month to quit drinking, and it had profound effects, and it worked, So so did my girlfriend, and I had a lot of other friends that have used it for to getting off medication, for instance, to help with antidepressant medication, get off that. So there's a lot of power in plant medicine and there's a big renaissance right now in the world that's happening. It's coming out now and much more prevalent into society and becoming much more mainstream. So I'm actually really looking forward to that experience. So something I want to get into actually is being able to help be a part of a clinic where you can treat people with PTSD and depression and problems like that with
like
plant
be
medicine.
a facilitator or something.
Exactly, yeah. And my girlfriend's a nurse, and she wants to become a nurse practitioner so that we can actually start our own clinic one day.
Well, can you help our community for a second and give us some advice on psychedelics? Because I've seen it, produce incredible benefits. I've also seen it uh, rabbit hole people into some pretty dark places for a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about your intention, how you're using it, right? I mean, that's the same, I think, with everything, especially when you're using a powerful tool like that. And that's the way I see it. Psychedelics, base jumping for me is the same. It's all medicine, right? It's a powerful tool that you can use to help you, or you can abuse it as well. So, you can use a really powerful tool as equally as you can use it for really good benefit. So learning basically what is your intention. Is just to party, just to get fucked up and have fun. That's one way of using those things. Another way of using them is, in a ceremonial form, out in the nature with your friends and setting intentions for what you want to get out of the medicine. And that way it becomes a powerful ally that can really help you. And that's the same with base jumping. I in my first years of jumping, I abused that very much. So it's a very powerful tool that I just abused and used as a drug. And eventually I came to understand and change my relationship with jumping into a medicine, into something that I use when I need it to help me benefit and help me grow and help me become a better version of myself, instead of just to get a fix. And I think that applies to psychedelics and to jumping, actually.
I think we could talk about both of these experiences interchangeably. Like they're
Yeah.
both extremely potent and extremely dangerous if handled incorrectly. Can you talk a little bit more about these potent experiences and how maybe you titrate or regulate the dosage in a way?
Mm.
Like when do you know it's not you're abusing base? When do
Yeah.
you know it's like maybe time to go for a walk or
Definitely. And that's
slow
something
down on
work
the
on a puzzle
psychedelics?
or
Yeah.
chill out a
Totally.
little bit? Because I think
Lots of
there's
trial
a
and
lot of
error. Lots of trial and error. Yeah. That's definitely a big part of it, is experience, because you can lie to yourself a bunch of times and say, oh, I'm just using this because I need this right now. But really you're just, being an addict, right? So that's something. I have an addictive personality type. I think a lot of people in the base jumping community do. And that's something you have to learn how to manage, so it took me many years, honestly, of jumping to get to a place where I didn't abuse it, where I was using it for positive reasons. And that really comes down to just being on, knowing yourself again, being honest with yourself, and saying what is the intention behind this right now? Is it just because I want to get high, because I want to have this powerful experience to kind of like distract myself from what's going on in my life right now, or do I want to use this to kind of turbo boost my experience to face my problems and to get over some of my obstacles and things like that? What is your intention? I think that's such an important question to ask all the time, not just with these potent experiences. They just amplify things in a more powerful way than other things do. And so I think that's very, very key to kind of always kind of check in with yourself and see where you're at. And that's the best way to do it, because no one else is going to know better than you are. And so it's just all about being honest with yourself.
Speaking of somebody knowing better than you, I think we've touched on both relationships and you putting the sport down. And I'd love to talk about your marriage and your wife, proposing that she knew better than you about when to put base jumping down and how that all played out.
Yeah, that was a tricky situation, man. That was my ex-wife, and I quit jumping for 2.5 years or so. Um, and she got into the sport, was a skydiver. I met her skydiving, and I told her I was a base jumper, and I said, this is, that's something I always just put out there right away when I meet someone new, like, hey, like, this is what I do. I'm asking a lot, and I know that. And that's I think that's something that we all as jumpers need to remember, is we are asking a lot from our partners when they are non-jumpers, especially. And you're saying, hey, like, I'm a base jumper, and I'm requiring more from you than normal, because you have to be okay with the fact that I'm doing this dangerous activity. She was at the time, and she thought she knew what she was getting herself into. into. And then, of course, that was right before 2015 and 2016 when all my friends died. Like 30 of my closest friends died. And she knew them all. She had met them all. She'd hung out with them. And then she just watching my friends drop off like flies. And she's like, you guys are idiots. Like, why would you do something like this? Like it clearly doesn't, the numbers don't add up. She saw like the worst 2 years of my whole base jumping experience was her introduction to the world. So, it really, really scared her. And I had to, so I had to step back. She basically gave me an ultimatum and said, look, I'm not okay with this anymore. Like, either you choose me or you choose jumping, but you can't do both at this point. So, initially was pretty resentful about it and upset about it, but I realized that, I could go back to base jumping anytime. I can't go back to her. So I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And I did. I really gave it a good effort, man. I really started just focusing on a bunch of other different stuff. But I still thought about it all the time. I really missed my friends and the community and the travel and, all the adventures and everything. That's a big part of my soul. It's a big part of what I need as an individual. So, over time, it started to wear on me. And we had our own other issues that every marriage does, every relationship has to deal with, and very different personality types. And in the end, it got in the way. Honestly, it did. It was a big part of me that was missing. And also because someone else told me I couldn't, and I have that kind of rebellious nature anyway. I'm like, well, if you're going to tell me I can't, I really want to do it now. And so in the end, it got down to me, like sneaking base jumps and stuff. And like, I was like, oh, this is ridiculous. Like, she's like, you're cheating on me. I'm like, I'm just jumping. Wow. So, we had to, that was a big part of our closure, and we're still friends and everything like that. We just grew apart that way. And I was really honestly glad to get jumping back into my life again. But now, thankfully to that experience, I don't have the same addiction to jumping anymore. It really taught me how to grow outside of base jumping, how to find myself outside of that powerful experience in normal daily activities. So now if I go a month without jumping, it's no big deal. I don't even think about it, right? But before, it was like a necessity that I had to jump at least a few times a week, this kind of thing. So now I really feel a different relationship with base jumping, and probably that's a big part of due to that experience with her and having to, cut ties that way. And I actually really respect her and her decision, and I understand it. I totally understand why she came to that, conclusion afterwards. She had to go back on her word of being okay with it because, she got thrown into a experience that was not what she was expecting. And honestly, neither was I. That was a very hard time for me as well. I think for a lot of us, I had a lot of self-doubt around jumping then, and I was questioning if I should continue, just because I had so much heartache and loss. I had really, it's one thing when you know someone from the community, from friends, and their crew has lost someone, but when your crew and your people, your brothers and sisters are just dying left and right around you, it gets pretty heavy, man. It's really, I had to really look deep inside myself to decide if I was going to continue, even without her input there. So, and I grew a lot from that experience. And it took me a long time to heal from that experience as well, too. Learning how to deal with.
Can you tell us about the sacrifices that you eventually reconciled? Because, man, losing that many friends definitely called base jumping into question in my mind. So where did you land on those sacrifices?
Yeah. In the end, it's for me, my calculations, and this is the way I look at many other things, is the not just the risk and reward, it's scale, but it's always a kind of a scale, right? So if you're in a relationship that has some negative things to it, like because everything's is polarized, right? So sometimes, as long as the situation the benefits outweigh the negatives for me, then I'm in, right? And so that's kind of what I looked at with base jumping, is do the benefits outweigh the negative possibilities in the situation of doing that activity. And it took me some time to get to the point where I felt like the scales were in the right favor again. For a while it wasn't. During that experience in my life, the scales were tipped where I felt like the benefits weren't outweighing the consequences. And so I left it, and I left it for a while, until the point where I could understand and remember how fleeting this life is anyway. Like, we're all going to die, man. That's guaranteed, like we're all leaving this body at some point. Do I want to live a life of fear and regulation and kind of putting myself in boxes to get some extra years out of it? And does that mean that I lived a better life because I lived 10 years longer? Or do I want to enrich my life with the passions that I want to be in, And I think, sometimes I wish I just loved crocheting or something, or going to the park and feeding birds or whatever, something easy and simple. If that was my passion, that'd be awesome, but it's not. My passion is these extreme sports and putting myself out in the fringe of activities in the world. That's something that I'm attracted to, and so I have to embrace that, and I have to understand that. And I approach these activities with a lot of reverence and a lot of gratitude, and acceptance of your mortality. It's such a nice thing when you just accept it. Like, you accept you're going to die, and it doesn't matter when. Like, live your life, live it to the fullest, give everything you can, and accept the consequences, and just be grateful and be happy that you were there to do it in the first place. So that's the way I approach all of this stuff now. That's when I was able to come to a place of harmony and balance with all of the trauma and negativity that I've experienced in base as well. I was able to sit back and be thankful for it. And in the end, my dead friends have taught me more than some of my live friends, because of what I had to go through with losing them and the grief around that, and really digging deep within my soul to make amends and to come to peace with these things. So I'm very grateful in the end for that experience. So yeah. That's kind of the full circle, right? And I think that's the full circle in general. It's like when you get into a skill set and you develop your skills and you become a master at it, the full circle is giving back, right? It's like you progress, you start out and you build your skill assets and your data, and in my mind, you complete that skill set when you're giving it back. So I did tandem skydiving for 15 years. I did 15,000 tandems or something like that. And people are always like, how did you stay in the field for that long and be stoked still? And it's because of that, because I get to give it back. I get to take someone out of the public with no experience at all in the sky, strap them to the front of me, and then throw them out of a plane. And it's such a powerful frame of you can really touch a stranger's life in a very powerful way with the tandem skydive. And that was my way of being able to give back my passion in the sport, and introducing people to parachutes and to the freedom that they experience, so to be able to overcome their fears and to kind of really face it head on, like in that kind of environment. And so that's, I think, something that I want to do in the base world as well. I want to be able to give back all of this information and years and years, over a decade of dedication to urban jumping. Me and Scotty Bob, and we've talked about this, and we're even thinking of developing an urban jumping school. So that people can, because mentorship is kind of lost, man. It's died. Like, people don't do it really anymore. Now it's just classes for your first jump course at a bridge, and then you're jumping off a cliff, and the more advanced courses, and then you're going to some terminal courses, and your wingsuit courses, and there's all these different categories of courses now, and there's not really mentorship anymore for someone to kind of take you along and show you the ropes. And so I'm like, well, why not? Why not make it, get it out there? People, because it's still only going to attract a small amount of people. It's not going to be like some mainstream thing ever. Like, urban's just never going to be that. But I do feel that, why not? Why not take 2 people on in a weekend and give them a 3-day course and really show them the depth and the field of my knowledge of what I've really learned through my experience of all this time in the urban environment, so that information, it's because it makes it safer. It makes it, that way it's a way for me to ensure that my legacy doesn't die, that urban doesn't die, that the 4 objects don't die, with our generation, because 2 generations down in base jumping, it could just be wingsuit mountain flying, and that's all it becomes. It could happen that way. I want to make sure that doesn't die when we leave the sport, or we're just too old to do it anymore. I want to be able to project that out into the future, to make sure there's still some gangster rebel motherfuckers out there jumping some stuff in the city, that are just silently with their hand up in the air with the middle finger, and just doing their thing to kind of push back a little bit against the norms and be out there on the fringe. That's the stuff I hope to project out into the future.
So is that the legacy that you'd like to leave behind if someone were to be able to look at your career thus far, like the sum total of it.
Definitely.
What's the message that you'd like them to leave with, having seen all of what you've done?
Definitely, anyone that's interested in urban that wants to learn about it and not have to go through all the trial and error that I had to go through, I would love to be able to pass that information on. So that's really what I'm developing right now. I'm 45. I'm sure I'll be jumping for it as long as I can, but there's limited windows still there for me on how long that's going to be. I'm going to be pushing as hard as I am right now, and so I want to be able to pass the torch, so to speak, to onto the future generations, the gangster kids that are coming out now. I've been really impressed with, by the way, some of these guys coming up into the urban now. I'm like, wow, like they're starting from a different level than we're started at, and I'd like to just be able to just pass that information on to people that are interested in doing it, and doing it in a smart and safe way, in a way that's repeatable, in a way that's respectful. The morals and ethics behind urban is constantly changing and evolving, and staying on top of that, being aware of all of that. And just kind of being in the game, like making an urban handbook. Basically, it says, hey, like this is what you guys can do. This is what I've learned through my experience. And then actually doing on-site work with people, taking them to objects and teaching them how to observe everything, and to build this mental maps, and to kind of really become an independent urban jumper where they can go out and start, because there's no shortage of buildings, man. Let me put it that way. Okay. People get stressed out and they're like, oh yeah, well, if you get more jumpers, then the objects are going to get burned. And no, they are not. I guarantee it, dude. I've been in this thing for a long time. Like, everyone wants to be a tourist in the urban thing and come and jump, and dudes, they got their building and they go on. Okay. They don't stick around. So we get a couple of guys that stick around, that get, super jacked on it and then want to do that. Like let it develop, let it progress, let it grow into something that it can be. Like, I honestly, I rarely go back to the same building and jump it. I'm just so interested in the next one and the next one and the next one. And there's no shortage, man. I'm in LA and I probably jumped like 40 buildings now, dude. And there's way more projects I have in my manual right now, my handbook, that I'm ready to go on. Same in San Diego, same in every city you go to. There's just an endless field, and just starting with the low hanging fruit, and then you work your way up to the more complex problems as you develop your skill set, as you get better. And then you're always in that place of learning. That way you're not just at a dead end anymore. There's always more to figure out, to learn, to kind of grow as you go along, depending on the difficulty of the project. So that's really what I'd like to kind of pass the torch on to people, so that they just have that stoke forever. I'm so stoked to just jump buildings still. Like, I just obsess and think about it all the time. I've got laundry lists of notes and, pictures. And if you look at my phone, it's just pictures of buildings. Like, what is this guy, like, obsessed with architecture or something? Like, like, no, this is all stuff that I'm building for myself, and some of the projects it goes off from 2 years later, I get to it, So anyway, it's been great talking to you guys.
Well, Jamie, I think that this conversation has been a success in showing what an interesting paradox you are of spirituality and punk rock. I really enjoyed this.
Hard act to follow. Sorry, girlfriends.
Most of us wouldn't put spiritual path in, climbing through buildings and all of the activities you've been involved with. And it's always a pleasure to be proven wrong or question the way I've thought about things in the past. So appreciate that. And I think we could go on with this conversation for hours and hours, but we're going to wrap it up here.
Totally.
And so where can people find you? Where can people reach out and learn more about what it is you're doing?
So, I mean, obviously on social media, Facebook, Instagram, that kind of stuff right now. I'm in the process, like I said, of developing a program. So if people are interested, you can hit me up on social media. And just message me and say that you're interested in learning urban, and we're actually putting together something pretty special and awesome. And a lot of people that will go through first jump courses through Scotty and Julia's school, they can also reach out if they're to the point where they want to start looking at their first building, and they can find me afterwards. And after they've done some more advanced courses, they can come and do an urban school with me. So that is something that is in the process of being developed, and I'm very excited about. And so, yeah, definitely you can find me that way. And shortly thereafter, we'll have, a website and things like that coming on in the future. But
great. And as that begins to materialize, can we have you come back on and share some of your experiences?
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, this is going to be a whole new ball game. Like, hey guys, yeah, you got to sign this waiver just so you know you could get arrested, you might die.
Yeah. I'd love to see the face on the lawyer you asked to write up that waiver.
Oh man. Well, until then, thanks for joining us. This has been the man, the myth, the legend, the Ginger Ninja.
Yeah, appreciate it, boys. Good to chat with you.
Thanks for joining us for another episode. If you have any thoughts to share with us, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Instagram at exitpoint.podcast with our email addresses in the episode descriptions. Big shout out to Mark Stockwell, our sound mixer and co-producer, for being part of this project. Tune in next time or come find us on the Exit Point.